We would stand in here with some PowerPoint presentation. His son will assist him in this presentation. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So thank you all for coming to this second half of the Vaishnava Sanga. Before proceeding, I'd like to thank the organizers from the bottom of my heart for organizing this wonderful retreat. We've had a wonderful 2 days, and I'm sure there's a lot more nectar to come. And it's just been 2 days full of nectarian transcendental mellows, and we hope that people will be able to stay a little longer to hear the rest of the wonderful presentations. Now, before I start, I'd just like to, first of all, say our Guru Pranams, to invoke the blessings of our acharyas. So you can say it together with me if you like. Kam karoti vachalam pangam langadeti kirim yakyapravamande Shri Guru Dinataranam. Offer our several obeisances onto my spiritual master. By his mercy, the lame can cross mountains and the deaf can give eloquent lectures. Shri Prabhupada Jai. Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananandjana Shalakaya Chakshurvedamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaurava Namo Vishtaya Krishna Dasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Charine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarabhisha Kripa Sindhu Vayevacha Patitana Pavanebhyo Vishnavyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasati Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I was asked to speak on this topic called transitioning from Grihastha to Vanaprastha, and I have no experience in this. I'm from the Grihastha ashram, but I have no experience in Vanaprastha, so I don't want to give any false ideas away, and I don't think I'm planning to take any of this, so I can tell my family members to relax, and I can start with the presentation. I was instructed some weeks back by His Grace Prabhu to give a talk on this. So everything that I'm saying is by the mercy of the Acharyas, by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. Because I'm not in the Vanaprastha ashram, I'd like to say that everything I'm saying is by Srila Prabhupada's teachings. And I can speak, even though I'm not a Vanaprastha, because I'm not speaking my own words, I can give this class because I'm speaking from Srila Prabhupada's direct lotus mouth, by his mercy. So thank you. Also like to say that amongst our assembly, there's people that could give this class much in more eloquent form. So please forgive me for my disqualifications and offenses. Also, in our movement, we have people such as His Holiness Bhakti Raghav Maharaj and Bhakti Vidya Puran Swami Maharaj who have done a lot of research and are very great speakers in this topic of Varnashrama Dharma. So we pray that we can have their association some future time to give us enlightenment on these 4 ashramas. But for today, we'll focus on the transitioning from Grihastha to Varnashrama. Now, I chose, or actually, Guru Maharaj asked me to take this topic and entitled it Employment After Employment. Because in our Grihastha ashram, we're actually employed both materially and spiritually, but it does not stop there. As Mother Shanti has said, this employment continues. So when we walk into the Vanaprastha ashram, we're still employed in the service of the devotees of Lord Krishna. So there's more work to be done. The outline of the talk is as follows. What our acharyas have said about this topic. We'll start off with that, and we'll start off with some pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. What is the definition of these 2 ashramas? And I know yesterday we had a wonderful eloquent topic and discussion on the Grihastha ashram, but we'll just review some of these things in terms of how it plays into this talk and the definition of the Vanaprastha ashram. Why are we discussing this? We'll talk about that. What's the importance and what are the realizations as we go through the Grihastha ashram? Because some of us may actually be interested in thinking about the Vanaprastha ashram. And if so, why are we interested in that? And if we are, then how do we do it? How do we transition from the Grihastha ashram to the Vanaprastha ashram? And then we'll finish off with some questions and answers. First of all, I'd like to also say that I was inspired to give this talk by Shankar Prabhu. I wanted to say a few words about Shankar Prabhu because I could not think that this talk would be complete without some glorification. He's my Vartaman Pradakshina Guru. I met him back in 1982, and through him and his family, we were introduced to Krishna consciousness at that time. So thank you so much, Prabhu. And he continues to inspire many, many people in the greater Ottawa area and beyond. And without his presence, I don't think the temple would be what it is today. So this topic, actually, that I'm presenting today, was presented many, many millions of years ago. It was actually discussed in the transcendental soap opera between Lord Brahma and the four Kumaras. Right? Because Lord Brahma had told the four Kumaras, you go into the Grihastha ashram. But because they wanted to, that was not their idea, they said, forget it. We need to study a little more. So therefore Lord Shiva came and the Manus and Prajapatas and so forth that actually carried on with the Grihastha ashram. But anything that we're saying today has actually been repeated many, many years ago, but it's nice to repeat this back again so we can reflect on it. So what do the acharyas say about these ashrams? I'd like to present some things that may confuse us and then try to align these two seemingly contradictory ideas together, because when you read the Shastras, when you read one chapter and then read another book and read another chapter, there sometimes appears to be some contradictions, but really there are no contradictions in Krishna consciousness. But let's see what they may seem to be. And as earlier we said in this morning's class, sometimes the perception may not be actually what is reality. So I hope to share with you what actually is reality in the scriptures. This famous verse that Lord Chaitanya says, this is actually the last of the four verses he says before the Rath Yatra starts. The four verses. He says that I'm not a Brahmana, I'm not a Kshatriya, Vaishya or Shudra, I'm not a Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, or Sannyasi. I'm the eternal servant of the servant of the servant of the Lord Sri Krishna, Mati or Gopis. So once he denounces these ashrams, he says these ashrams are not important. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in Madhya Lila, Lord Chaitanya again says, in the famous discussion between Ramananda Roy and Lord Chaitanya at the banks of the river in Godavari, in the escalation to the most important service, Lord Chaitanya says that Varnashrama is external to Bhakti. So Bhakti Yoga is much, much, much higher than Varnashrama Dharma. Pular Maharaj also says more or less the same thing to his father. Sadhu manye sura varya vihinam sada samadvigna diyam asad grihat hitvatma patam graham angakupam vanam gato yad darim ashrete. Temporary household life is having fallen in a dark well with no water but only suffering. One should go to this position and go to the forest. He's instructing his material father, who's very powerful, materialistic. No, she should give us life because you still have a chance to go to the forest. That's what he's telling his demonic father. And he says that this life of Grihastha ashram is actually a blind well, Griham anda kupam. And we should actually take Vanaprastha. So that's what the acharyas are telling us. So on one hand, Lord Chaitanya and one of the 12 Mahajans, Maharaj, is saying, give up these explanations of Grihastha. But Lord Krishna says in the early part of Bhagavad Gita in chapter 4, says, Chaturvarniya Maya Shastam Guna Karma Vivagasa. As I've created these four divisions of human society for a purpose, to keep in mind. And he actually states that well before he gets to the process of devotional service, which occurs later on in the Bhagavad Gita. So it's like a stepping stone. Swami Bhaktivinoda Thakur said that there was a great need for Deva Varnashram Dharma. And actually stated that this need is so important that we should not abandon it just because we think that we're chanting purely and we're advanced bhaktas. If we take the mentality, we become the Prakrita Sages. So he actually stressed the importance of Varnashram Dharma. He actually said it to his son, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who tried to learn from the local Vaishnavas and the Madhavas about the system of Varnashra Dharma. And Srila Prabhupada, because he had a limited time on this planet, he had 12 years from the time that he started the movement, he also limited time, but if you read his teachings and his letters, there also is a stress on the Varnashra Dharma as well. So our more recent acharyas have instructed us that this Dharma is very, very important. And as well, Lord Chaitanya then therefore says, Gopi Bharatu Padakamali or Das Das Anudas. He says that we are ultimately servants of the servant of the servant of the gopis who are the Nityana Lord Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada says in a letter dated October 1974 that Krishna consciousness is above Varnashrama. Varnashrama is a good program for material life and it helps one in spiritual life, but spiritual life is not dependent on it. So let's reflect back on this. The Acharyas, we know that we are part and parcel of Lord Krishna. The famous verse that is spoken by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he says that, Krishna Tathata Shakti Achintya Veda Veda Tattva. So we're part and parcel of Lord Krishna. We're qualitatively the same, but quantitatively different from Lord Krishna. But ultimately, we have the same qualities as Lord Krishna. So because Lord Krishna is a person, we're also a person. Lord Krishna also was in the Grihastha ashram, and we are also in the Grihastha ashram. But the thing you have to remember is that simply because of our designation of being in this ashram does not automatically get us to pure bhakti. We sometimes think that because we have this designation as a brahmachari, I'm a grihastha, I'm a vanaprastha, I'm a sannyasi, I therefore have the license to pure bhakti. No, that's not the case. And that's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj were saying, was that to actually be properly situated in the ashram, one must chant the holy name of the God, or Lord Krishna, offensively, purely. Only by doing so can we support these 4 ashramas in the proper manner. That is the main ingredient, is the chanting of the holy name, more so than actually being situated in the Varnashrama system. We also know from these 2 very, very important verses that Maharaj had actually stressed upon. In fact, one of them yesterday in his wonderful, eloquent lecture, that means basically that Lord Krishna does not desire our service unless it is unmotivated, unless it is purely doing it according to his direction. If we follow Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, any other yoga except Bhakti Yoga, he does not accept our service. It has to be unmotivated and pure. Also, we have to remember that we are all pure Krishna conscious souls, and bhakti does not come from anywhere. It simply comes from hearing and chanting. As has been stressed in this seminar, this 2-day seminar, that everything begins from hearing and chanting. So we have this inherent in us, is not to be found anywhere. That's what Lord Chaitanya tells Sanatana Goswami. Nitya Siddha Krishna Pema, Kabunaya. That means it's nowhere to be had. It only can come from within us if we get the association of devotees through hearing and chanting. So therefore, bhakti is something that is present, but we have to develop it in the association of devotees and through the pure chanting. So I just want to share a pastime with you that the principle is never to forget Lord Krishna. All of the principles are below this. You should never forget Krishna. It says in Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Madhya Lila, that Krishna is the origin of Lord Vishnu. He should always be remembered and never forgotten at any time. All the rules and prohibitions mentioned in the Shastra should be the servants of these 2 principles. This is a very nice pastime that links this. It occurred many years ago, and this is a recollection by His Holiness Hridayananda Swami. It says, Karndar and I were in Prabhupada's room in the early 70s. It was a beautiful afternoon, a breeze was blowing, the sun was setting, and the golden rays were shining on Prabhupada. It was a sublime atmosphere. Prabhupada began to talk about India at the time of the century. He explained how people used to work, the relationships between the householders and the servants, and how people used to cook. He took us back to his early childhood when he was having Rath Yatra and worshipping Radha Govinda. They looked at us very strongly and said, whatever I'm doing now, I was doing then. Do you understand? We were speechless. Prabhupada said, never was there a time when they did not know Krishna. Do you understand? He said it in such a way that it was clearly the case. That was a very powerful experience. So, we can, of course, we're not speculating, but what Prabhupada is saying is that one should always try to remember Lord Krishna in whatever activity you're doing. So whether you're in the Grihastha ashram or the Vanaprastha ashram, our primary duty is to remember Lord Krishna and spread the teachings. That's the essence. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the definitions. What are some of the definitions? And please, by no means are these definitions comprehensive. Yesterday we had a very wonderful class, and I think we went into that great detail, but I just thought I'd touch upon some of these things, just reflect and review these in terms of how it relates to today's presentation. So the Grihastha is defined as a householder with Krishna in the center. When Krishna is not in the center, it's defined as a Grihastha. Grihastha means the house, and Ishta means one who's stationed in the house, or one who has a deity of Lord Krishna in the house. So Grihastha ashram begins with serving Lord Krishna. That's how it's a Grihastha ashram. Of the 4 ashramas is the second ashram, and according to scriptures, the age is 25 to 49. Now, Prabhupada was an expert in place, time, and circumstance, Desha, Kala, Patra. So all those things he would adjust according to time, place, and circumstance. Now he was an empowered acharya. We're not acharya. We have to take from his teachings. What we're saying is that in this day and age, and Prabhupada didn't understand it, is that this age is not written in stone. We know that people enter the Grihastha ashram late in life sometimes at the age of 30 and 40, and they may actually retire much, much later because of circumstances of today. We're not a perfect society, and we should not expect ourselves to be perfect. We should try to follow what the scriptures say. Simply following is what makes us perfect, not by following or imitating what the acharyas are saying. Prabhupada defined Grihastha ashram to one of his letters. He said that is to live one's life, one's wife. So that's the definition, if you want, from Srila Prabhupada, that is to live with one's wife. So being in the Grihastha ashram means that the Grihastha, that is the male devotee, and all the people are not actually connected to the household life. They're there as guests in a hotel. So when we go to a hotel, we give them our name, we give them some of our, credit card, etc., to register in the hotel. But once we check out, we'll leave the hotel. We're there only for a temporary period of time. Similarly, the Grihastha ashram, everything there that's in the Grihastha ashram is for the service of Lord Krishna. Your car, your house, your furniture, your belongings, your bank account is actually meant for the service of Lord Krishna and for the deity, and for the deities and for the movement. So nothing actually belongs to us. When you start thinking that these things belong to us, that's when we become attached, and that's when we enter the Grihastha consciousness. So we're only a traveler in the hotel. We don't actually assume ownership. The Bhagavatam also says that there's a verse in the Bhagavatam, I forget which canto, but it also describes that as we're going to the Grihastha ashram, it's like a traveler in a hotel. We're not actually seeking ownership. Also, the Grihastha ashram is the only ashram that's licensed for regulated sex. Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that I'm sex life not contrary to religious principles. He says that in chapter 7. Of none of the other ashrams can you have children except in the Grihastha ashram. You cannot have in the Brahmachari ashram, of course, and you else forget about it. Vanaprastha, you have your wife, but you cannot have children. So basically, the only time you can have children, and this is for procreating Krishna conscious children, is in the Grihastha ashram. That's very, very important. And there's a whole aspect behind having children. Maybe you can discuss another time, but just like to highlight a few things. Is that, of course, this has to be done through the proper samskaras. We know that there's a famous Garbhadan samskar in which we're chanting 50 rounds that day, at least 50 rounds. Actually, it's more than 50 rounds. It's the number of rounds that your guru has told you to chant, but they usually recommend 50 rounds or more at that time. And of course, there's other samskars as well, that at the time that the child is conceiving, there's certain mantras you be chanting, certain time and properness of that. But that's another talk. And also you must seek, before you actually consider conceiving, you must actually have the permission of your guru. So for people that think that this is a license to enjoy, it's actually, this deters you from enjoying because of all the important mantras and all the important things you have to follow to procreate this Krishna conscious child. So it's a very, very big responsibility, and fortunately we have books on that, and we have the instructions of the acharyas. So it is done in a very, very regulated way. So to the people that are, when you go to work, to them you look just like them. Externally you may be in Maya. To them, oh, he has a car, he has a nice bank balance, he's doing well, he has a wonderful family. But at home, internally, you're always, and at work, you're always with Krishna, you're always Krishna conscious. So you're always detached from sense enjoyment. That's the properness of being in the Grihastha ashram. You're always thinking about Lord Krishna, thinking how you can utilize your resources for serving the devotees and their betterment. And the other important thing is that this ashram, and unfortunately sometimes we don't do this well, we have to realize that we have to support the other three ashrams. As the Grihasthas, we have the duty of supporting the brahmacharis, we have the duty of supporting the Vanaprasthas, and the duty of supporting the sannyasis. Why? Because they cannot earn a living. They're not allowed to earn a living. They're actually full-time serving Lord Krishna. Only in the Grihastha ashram can you actually earn a living in which you can keep some of the Lakshmi, as it says in the Nectar Devotion, the Vivadi principle, 50% for your movement, 50% for emergencies, 25% for emergencies, and 25% for family. 50% should go towards the propagation of Krishna consciousness, according to our Acharya Goswami. So, the Grihastha ashram allows us to help support the other ashrams. That's very important. And by doing so, we can propagate the mission of ISKCON very nicely. Now, what is the Vanaprastha ashram? The Vanaprastha ashram is actually retired life in Krishna consciousness. And that's what I meant way earlier on, that you're still employed by ISKCON. You can't just sort of hang up your shingle and say, okay, I'm leaving now and I'm going to the forest, bye-bye, and I don't have any cell phone, no email, nothing. You're still employed. So the Vanaprastha ashram, according to Srila Prabhupada, means that you're actively employed preaching the mission of Krishna consciousness. The only difference is that you're not working anymore, you can't have any children anymore, but you still have your wife. So people in the early days in ISKCON, when this movement was early, there was a misconception of what is Vanaprastha. There's a misconception of what is sannyas, because sometimes people were prematurely leaving their ashram and going to take sannyas. And what happened is that the family suffered, the wives suffered, the wives went looking for another partner, the husband gave up his support of the wife very prematurely, the children were left sort of unlooked after. So there are a lot of problems, and we have to understand that transitioning from one ashram to another ashram is a big responsibility. It must be done with a number of things. We'll talk about that a little later on, and how the transition actually happens. But it just can't happen like that. For example, you must have the permission of your guru. Second thing is you must be qualified. You should ask yourself, are you actually qualified to enter the Vanaprastha ashram? It's not simply as going to a dham and setting up, buying a house there and chanting 24 hours a day. No, that's actually going to make you a perfect sahajya. You'll be chanting, but what are you actually giving back to the mission? We have to understand that the devotees of ISKCON in the early days gave their life for ISKCON, so we have to give our life back to ISKCON by serving them very nicely. And we can do that once we enter the Vanaprastha ashram. Of course, we're doing that in all the other previous ashrams, but in Vanaprastha ashram we can actually, keep our focus more on serving the devotees of Lord Krishna. We actually owe them back for that. So Vanaprastha is a third of the four ashrams. And again, according to scriptures, it's suggested at age 50. We discussed it already. I'm going to be 50 soon. I don't plan to take Vanaprastha. Many people here have already passed that age, are still in the Grihastha ashram. That's fine. But the scripture suggests recommended age is 50, not written in stone. But at that time, that's when we at least should think of renouncing our physical ties with the wife. We should not separate from the wife, but we should renounce any physical association with the wife. And biologically, that's also important. There's a biological reason behind that too, but certainly scriptural-wise, one should renounce physical ties with the wife before, or at least no later than after the age of 50. The couple should travel together to temples, to gams, and preach the Krishna conscious movement widely. In our movement, we have wonderful couples that have taken to the Vanaprastha ashram. They're doing a wonderful seva. They come to Toronto. They give us enlightenment on book distribution, Sankirtan, Prabhupada's nectar, Kirtan. They are serving the movement wonderfully, and they're doing everything very, very nicely, inspiring all of us. But if you really want to know what is the Varnashram system and what does it say about Vanaprastha, we have to understand what the scriptures say. So we go to the Bhagavatam, the 7th canto, which is called the Science of God. In the 7th canto, in the 12th chapter, Narad Muni talks about the perfect society, talks about the 4 social orders and the 4 ashramas or spiritual classes in canto 7, chapter 12. So, because of scarcity of some time, I'll just give you a bit of a test or a sampling of what's there. If you have time, please, I encourage you to read on your own what actually goes, what has Narad Muni said about the Vanaprastha ashram. It's actually very strict, and in fact, it deterred me. But again, it's time, place, and circumstance. So what does Narad Muni say? Here it is. Again, this is a sample only. He says that we cannot eat any food grains. Okay, so we cannot eat any food grains except if it's when it's offered into the fire. So that's known as Sadhu. So we cannot eat any food grains except it's offered in sacrificial fire. So that means you're having a Kadashi for life. Okay, it might be a little difficult for some of us. Also, we cannot cook in fire unless recommended by the Guru. We should not eat any food grains that are tilled in the field or not fully ripe. We can eat fruit only once it's ripened by sunshine. We should live in a shed or cottage or live in a cave. And our clothing is that we have to wear matted locks. We have to have hair that's matted. And we can actually never take a shower after, or bath. We can never wash ourselves. We have to keep our nails uncut, our hair uncut, and we cannot cut our facial hair. So when you have to take a vow, you have to take a vow for 2 years, 4 years, 8 years, 10 years, or 12 years. So you have to take this vow for that period of time, and then that's when you can call yourself a Vanaprastha. You also have to wear deer skin, have a rod, and wear tree bark as covering. I think in Canada that probably won't work. Maybe this is for another time, place, and circumstance. But that's what it says in the scriptures. That's what our Acharya, the very exalted Acharya, Narad Muni is telling us. That's how Vanaprastha is, the definition of Vanaprastha. So, fortunately, by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada and his predecessors, we were able to still enter this ashram but not have to follow these strict examples. But the key thing is that the Vanaprastha prepares one for complete renunciation from Grihastha and increases the attachment to Krishna. And then that prepares us for sannyas. So it's really like a probation period for sannyas. We're trying to practice, we're trying to increase our service and reduce our material needs and put our time and effort more towards Krishna and renounce our material desires. So it gives us a time to do that. Of course, we have to do that early on, as much as possible in the Grihastha ashram, so we can, in the Vanaprastha ashram, we can preach and so forth. Now, I promised that I would tell you why do we even discuss this topic. And I mentioned that in brief form earlier on. The reason why we discuss this topic is because we always have to go back to Srila Prabhupada's teachings. So back when Srila Prabhupada incorporated ISKCON back in 1966 in July, before he did that, he had these 7 founder statements, okay? These 7 things. And I urge you that once in a while we should look at these statements because they reinforce what is our responsibility at ISKCON. It's like the 10 Commandments or the Constitution. When we become a citizen of Canada, in some form or another, we have to understand Canada's laws, etc., who the Prime Minister is, and so forth. So similarly, this is like taking the Hippocratic Oath for doctors. We have to understand that these are the 7 commandments that Srila Prabhupada laid out. So let's read through these. And there's a common theme that relates to this talk. The first one is to systematically propagate spiritual knowledge to society at large and educate all people in the techniques of spiritual life in order to check the imbalance of values in life and to achieve real unity and peace in society, in the world. So balance of values in life, that can come, those things can actually seep in the Grihastha ashram. So we have to check those imbalances. That's one of the things that Srila Prabhupada is saying. 2 is to propagate the consciousness of Krishna, God, as it is revealed in the great scriptures of India, especially Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. We accept the principle of transmigration of the soul, reincarnation. 3, to bring the members of society together with each other and near to Krishna, the prime entity, thus developing the idea within members and humanity at large, that each soul is part and parcel of the quality of Godhead, Krishna. 4, to teach and encourage the Sankirtan movement, congregational chanting of the holy name of God as revealed in the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Very, very important. Following this, Radha Mohan Prabhu will enlighten us more about this subject. But Prabhupada wants all of us to, in some way or another, we may not all be Buddhist leaders, we may not all be able to give classes, we may not all be able to do daily worship, but in some form or another, we have in some way to preach this movement, to outreach. That's the word we use now, is to outreach to other people that have not heard about Krishna consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada is telling us that is the mission. 5 is to erect for the members of society at large a holy place of transcendental pastimes dedicated to the personality of Krishna. Prabhupada did that profusely during his lifetime, and that's currently being done in Mayapur with the temple of Vedic Planetarium. So many of these temples are a place of worship to get more people to come to them. That was Prabhupada's desire. 6 is to bring the members closer together for the purpose of teaching a simpler, more natural way of life. And finally 7, with a view towards achieving the aforementioned purposes, to publish and distribute periodicals, magazines, books, and other writings that help realize these purposes. Very important. Book distribution, reading books, understanding books, and distributing them. Very, very important. So these are the 7 commandments of Srila Prabhupada. Next one. So this is nectar, Prabhupada nectar again, showing a pastime. Books are the basis. So this is Atma Tattva Prabhu. It's a bit of a funny story, but we're serious at the end. Yes, Prabhu.
Is there any way to make the letters bigger?
Make it bigger? If I can make them bigger, please? For the rest of the talk, Prabhu?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you make the font bigger?
Go to the second slide.
Is that a little better?
Bring it back so it fills the whole screen.
Sorry. Then we'll have to do that for the slide.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. I wish I could do that earlier. Okay, so this is a pastime by Atma Tattva Prabhu. We brought Miss Mexico to see Srila Prabhupada. In those days, we were young and brought any celebrity to Prabhupada. Miss Mexico spent her years doing events, smiling, saying a few nice words, and getting a picture taken. She's more or less in that mood. She sat in front of Prabhupada and made her customary spiel, saying in Spanish that it was very nice being Miss Mexico and fluttering her eyelashes. If you know Atma Tattva, he has a bit of a flair to his pastimes. I was translating. She said, "I'm very glad to be here. I've enjoyed the program very much and hope to come again sometime. Prabhupada said to her, why do you want to come again? He's not all concerned with the glamour of it. He was very sober. She couldn't really answer. No one asks questions like that in Mr. Mexico. He asked her very seriously, why do you want to come? Have you read my books? She said, no. He said, then why do you want to come? Why do you say you want to come again? So she's caught without an answer, and at that point she stopped being Mr. Mexico and just started being a soul. So she got the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. Imagine that. So she was here, came down to here. Spirit soul. She's not the body, she's spirit soul. Okay. I'll just read while we're saying this. So we're carrying on as to why we should even discuss this topic. As we said earlier, we actually owe to the mission. And the famous US President John F. Kennedy said, this is actually payback time. We know that in his famous, he actually has many, many famous quotes. In one of his famous quotes, he says, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So JFK was saying that, and similarly Prabhupada and the Acharyas are saying that we owe it to the movement because we have taken our vows. We have a responsibility to follow our vows and spread this message to the members at large. That's the first thing. The second thing is also a natural progressive change stage of life. As we advance in Krishna consciousness, we desire that we have to do this. We have to basically reduce our material needs and desires and increase our yearning and spreading for Krishna consciousness. That happens sometimes naturally as we progress. As we commit less and less offenses, as we chant more purely, as we continue to dwell more on the 10 offenses and try to follow them more strictly, naturally a desire develops in our hearts. And our desire becomes that we should actually have to develop the stage of Vanaprastha. It's also a practice of detachment from material desires and increase our attachment to Bhakti Yoga. Lord Chaitanya says time and time again, Prema Pum Artha Mahan. That is, that through the Krishna consciousness, following the Krishna consciousness teachings and guidelines, we develop the gradual ascendance to Prema Bhakti. Important thing is, again, is service to the Vaishnavas. And there are many, many examples. Lord Chaitanya himself, we know that in the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya in Navadvip Dham, right after he took sannyas, he used to basically feed the devotees himself. He used to feed the devotees. And then later on, when he used to come yearly for the Rath Yatra, they used to actually come to the outskirts of Jagannath Puri. He used to go meet the devotees, headed by his very, very close associates, and he used to take their clothes and wash them himself personally and actually fold them. So this is the Supreme Lord serving his devotees. So he says that I'm not a sannyasi, I'm simply a servant, I'm their servant. So this is the mood that we should try to imbue in ourselves, the mood of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Again, following the example but not imitating. And Srila Prabhupada, in the very early days, we know that, as Maharaj has said here just during last class for the initiation, is that Srila Prabhupada cleaned up after the initiation of his first disciples. He would do that as well when he was cooking for the disciples. They used to honor the prasadam and then leave, and he used to stay up at night and wash the pots. We know that. There's also another famous story as well, is that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, perhaps I can be corrected, but Rupanuga Prabhu, one of his early disciples, had said that the lineup system for the Sunday feast actually started by Srila Prabhupada. So what happened was, one of the early temples during the Sunday feast, the devotees had lined up and the guests, and they're looking for Srila Prabhupada. Whereas Srila Prabhupada is actually in the line, waiting to get a plate of prasadam. So here's our Acharya in line with his, people waiting for prasadam. So Prabhupada taught by example. That's why he's the founder Acharya of the movement. During the Gaur Purnima festival, in the early days in Mayapur, before the building was constructed, Prabhupada would often get up in the middle of the night and go to each devotee's room or hut and see if they had a mosquito net. He would actually get up at night and make sure that a secretary had each of his devotees have a mosquito net. He would get up at night to do that, to do seva. And then finally, in his last days in Vrindavan, we know that he stopped eating, he lost a lot of weight. Materially, we see that, but translocally, he was no affected. But his concern was again for his devotees. So in his late days, when he was not eating, he was physically weak. They had to actually pick him up. These two British devotees had to pick him up in a chair and take him and transport him from place to place. So one time when they were actually taking him, one of the devotees, the British devotees, who was actually strong and stalwart-like, he had a boil on his foot. And this boil actually caught, I think, an end of a nail. And all of a sudden he showed some pain. And Prabhupada noticed that. Now Prabhupada, he was very weak at that time physically, but he noticed that this devotee had suffered because of carrying him. And the day after, he actually went to the devotee and said, "Have you taken care of this boil?" He said, "No, Prabhupada, that's okay, it's nothing important." He said, "No." He actually sat down with the devotee, called him to the room, and actually told him what sort of medicine he should use for this boil. And then after giving that instruction, he would go back every day and make sure that the devotees followed the instruction until the boil got better. This is Prabhupada in his final days. He gave attention to his devotees very, very seriously. So, in our final discussion, we have a few more slides and we'll finish. The Varnashram system is the body of the society. ISKCON is based on the success of the 4 ashramas, and I hope that we have come to accept that the Varnashram system, the transition from the Grihastha and the Varnashram system, is what maintains the society of ISKCON, and of course all the other ashramas. It's a harmony, basically, that if the body, if all of a sudden the hand says that I'm going to go on strike, then what's going to happen is the stomach's going to suffer, and then all the other organ systems that depend on the stomach and the intestines will suffer. So we all have to work in harmony among the 4 ashramas to allow for success in the movement to please Srila Prabhupada. So it's like this. The sannyas ashram is like the head, the Vanaprastha is the arms, the Grihastha ashram is the stomach, the suppliers for the other 3 ashramas, as I said earlier, and brahmacharis are the legs. So we start off like this. So all these body parts have to work in unison. Next slide. So we'll finish up. How do we do this transition? We talked about what are the ashramas, why it's important for all the ashramas. We'll finish off how we actually make this transition. The question is, why do we take the Grihastha ashram in the first place? What is the desire? The desire should not be to get a partner. That's something that we follow. That's how we fall into the kupam. That's how we fall into the well. If we go into the Grihastha ashram thinking that I need a partner for my satisfaction, it's not going to work. We have to enter the Grihastha ashram thinking that together we have to serve Lord Krishna. That should be the primary motive. So we should not follow our urges or pushings as vegan, as it says by Goswami in the first verse of Nectar instruction. We should not follow our urge. Our material urge. We should follow what our acharyas say. So that's the important thing. That's the proper way of entering the Grihastha ashram. So our motivation should not be that I'm entering this married life to enjoy with her, or for her to enjoy with me. So it comes with a very, very big responsibility. When you take our marriage vows, we take our vows so that we live in unison, we live in harmony, and keep Krishna in the center. That's the importance of the married life in Krishna consciousness. We know from Srila Prabhupada's example, he actually went from the Grihastha, he was in the Grihastha ashram. And actually, unfortunately, his wife, we know, according to Liam Rita, that his wife did not support him. But even when he entered the sannyas ashram, Prabhupada supported his wife. So we have to understand that when, as Prabhus or men, when we're transitioning from the Grihastha ashram to the Vanaprastha, we do not leave our wife. Or when you're leaving from the Vanaprastha ashram to the sannyas ashram, you have to make sure that if you still have a partner, she has to be supported. Prabhupada actually showed the example. If you go to the Prabhupada Shikshamrita book, I think it's one of the volumes, certainly one of the volumes, I forget which volume it is, there's actually a quote there that says that he was actually depositing 5 rupees from his Punjab National Bank account directly to his wife's account while he was in sannyas order. So Prabhupada was supporting his wife right during the time of sannyas. Even though she did not like him and he did not necessarily like her, he was supporting his wife. So our commitment to our partner continues well on into the ashrams. And to carry on, before we can go into the ashram, we have to get the permission of our partner. We just can't say, okay, I'm entering this ashrama. We have to get her permission because it has to work together. Why? Because she may not approve of that, or there may be some misunderstanding that needs to be cleared up. That all has to be cleared up. And of course, she'll be traveling with you. You don't enter the Vanaprastha ashram leaving her behind, otherwise it's sannyas. Okay, so if this is Vanaprastha, the wife comes with you. You have to ask your guru for permission, and I understand that it has to be approved by the local temple council and the GBC. Because you're actually now in a position of bigger responsibility, you're traveling, you're preaching, what you're saying is upholding the values of the Acharyas, so it is a big responsibility, unless you take it with a lot of thought and understanding and preparation. So going back to what we said initially is that the advancement of Krishna consciousness is actually not necessarily, the misunderstanding is that it's dependent on our ashram. We say that because I'm entering the Vanaprastha ashram, I'm advancing Krishna consciousness. No, that's not how it works. It actually works the other way around. You're entering the Vanaprastha ashram because now you've gotten a better understanding of Krishna consciousness, and now you're in a capacity to share with others in a way that you're not attached to your household life. That is the proper way of transitioning into the Vanaprastha ashram. And we know that early days of ISKCON, and also a little later on in the famous Chokati temple, when they built the Chokati temple, there was a rift between the Grihasthas and Brahmacharis. The Brahmacharis would say, oh look, these Grihasthas, these Brahmanis, they earn a living, they come here once a week, then they go. And then the Grihasthas say, oh, these Brahmacharis, again, no offense here to anyone, these Brahmacharis are lazy, they live in the temple, everything is provided to them, all they have to do is preaching. So when the local GDC and Maharaj understood that there was a problem, so that's when a lot of things came about, such as the consular system. And from that, he actually turned it around and put a silver cloud, a silver line to the black cloud. He actually reconciled the two ashrams and see how wonderful he's going. So if you adopt the mentality now that we have in these wonderful temples like Chokati, will succeed very, very nicely. So the key thing is that one has to be firmly grounded in the ashram before you can transition to another ashram. Unless you're Pakka Grihastha, you cannot transition to a Vanaprastha. Unless you're proper Pakka or proper Vanaprastha, you should not take sannyas. So challenges will follow you. Challenges in the form of material desires that are still deep-rooted in our garden as let's say, creepers or creepers devotional service. When you have things like other plants coming, these can still be there, so you have to uproot them before we can transition to another ashram. So in closing, I believe this is the last slide. Nitai, can you just make that a little large? So I believe this is the last slide, and then we'll take time for, I think we have a few more minutes.
It's 5 to 1.
5 to 1, okay. So I'd like to share with you, in closing, 2 final letters by Srila Prabhupada that inspire us for the transition. In the first letter, this is written to one of his disciples in January 1975. Simply by changing our occupation or ashram does not change the situation. Whether married, unmarried, divorced, or whatever condition in life, preaching is not dependent on those things. Our duty, our occupational duty, is being preachers of Krishna consciousness. And later that year, in 1975, he said, regarding taking sannyas, this mentality that either I will have sex life or I will have sannyas, this is not proper. Sannyas means that one is finished with material life, so you should remain there. Actually, all my disciples are sannyasis because they have surrendered everything in the service of Krishna. So if you surrender everything in the service of Krishna, you're a sannyasi. So sannyasi, of course, it's an ashram, but if we try to work towards that mentality, then we can please Srila Prabhupada. So in closing, I'd like to offer my humble obeisances to my spiritual master, His Holiness Bhakti Marg Swami Maharaj. Our obeisances to our ISKCON founder, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, and to the Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharya Sampradaya for giving us these teachings. So everything I've said is from the scriptures. to the esteemed audience and devotees gathered here today, all the Vaishnavas, and to His Holiness Niranjan Swami Maharaj, who, with his blessings, this Sangha has prospered and flourished. And finally, but not lastly, of course, to the ISKCON Ottawa Sangha retreat organizers for a wonderful retreat. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. I'd like to open up the floor for any comments or criticisms, corrections, or any suggestions, please. Yes, we have a question. Maybe someone can hand the microphone to Mother. You can take.
Is there wireless? Oh, there. Okay, I can see. With microphone.
Thank you very much, Prabhu, for this presentation. It was really very nice, organized, very pragmatic. It was really straight to the point. So one of your earlier slides, you provided a definition of Grihastha. Actually, it was very simple. It was outlined that the definition is to live with one's wife. So I was just wondering if there is an equivalent for women, or maybe a more general question. What are the different ashrams for women? I was waiting for this since yesterday. I haven't seen this in the program, maybe for next year, but just like in your opinion, just briefly, what are the different options for women?
So from a limited understanding, the ashrams for women are coincident with ashrams for men. The key thing that you remember is that for women, the women have to be protected in whichever ashram they are. Because, as the scriptures say, is that it is a duty of the men to protect the women, otherwise the men that are not properly placed will actually usurp the independence of the women, or the freedom of women. So in whichever ashram the mother is in, or the woman is in, she has to be protected by the man. So yes, there's a brahmachari ashram, we know. There's also the Grihastha ashram, but all the same, there's always the male devotee. Now we know that in ISKCON, and I probably shouldn't speak much because I think it's better if we don't have a sannyas ashram for the women. The GBC is looking at that. There's a separate committee that's looking at that, but that's for a particular purpose. Now we know that in the examples, for example, during Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu's, when he was in the Grihastha ashram, Janama did accept disciples. We know that also other disciples falling from that line of Janama did have female acharyas. But at the present day, that ashram is not open to mothers for a particular reason, but of course GBC is looking at that. As far as I know, that the other ashrams are available, but of course they always have to be there with in the association of a male disciple. In the Brahmachari ashram, we know that, for example, Srila Prabhupada, he was there. He was looking after his daughters very, very nicely. So in any ashram, women have the open ability to join, but there must be the presence of a male to protect the women in that ashram. Maybe some of the senior disciples can answer that question.
Anybody else like to say something?
We have a lot of social turmoil due to trying to transplant, the original human system of society into a mess, a social mess. The Western society is a mess. So many of us may have difficulty of circumstances. Women may not be properly protected. They may not feel that there's a situation that they can peacefully live in. But Krishna consciousness is so wonderful that there's no impediment. Everything can be an impetus to become more Krishna conscious. And we may be very humbled by not being recognized, but humility is the only shelter, it's the only solution. So everything is Krishna. Whatever happens is Krishna. It's his energy and his arrangement. So, in devotional service, everything drives us more towards Krishna. The Kali Yuga is an ocean of thoughts. Another point is that every discussion of Varnashram just makes me think more and more of the need for community, to live in communities. Because Varnashram means a cooperation between, for instance, in Vanaprastha, we need the social support so that we can actually take Vanaprastha and our children, will be supported. And so it just points more and more to the need for establishment of Krishna conscious communities which are separate from Western society, in my view.
Thank you for your time.
Of course, Kalipani was saying that in the West, it's frowned upon that a society like ISKCON or others would kind of belittle the ladies or the women by saying that the man has to always be there on top and always has to be there to protect them. Of course, because unfortunately the men have not been there to protect them. So the women have felt vulnerable. If you're going to protect me, then do protect me, But many times in the name of protection, they actually get exploited. So then they want their own freedom. They want their own independence. And the men are not free. Actually, Prabhupada explains that in the material world, everyone wants to be a master. Because we want to be God. We see God as the supreme controller, and He's the supreme enjoyer. So we think, if I become the supreme controller, I'll also be the supreme enjoyer. But that's not our role. We're all servants. So the man's role is to abide by the scriptures. And that he has to surrender to the scriptures. He's not free to do what he wants. And when the wife sees that, she becomes inspired to assist the husband. And both of them lead peacefully. But if the man is not surrendered, and if he's not giving shelter, then it's a problem. Like Krishna says in the Gita, if you surrender to me, I will give you shelter. So there's a thing there that, yeah, we'll surrender, but you give shelter. But normally in the modern society, when people surrender, when they wave the flag in the war, what's the first thing the opposition, the conquerors do is they rape the woman. They exploit. They don't give shelter. So that's the problem, and that's why the Western society is so mixed up. But if in our society we can abide by this principle, then it will be very attractive.
Any other realizations, comments? Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Vanaprastha.
Haribol.